Hello and welcome to Airheads, a not-so-serious look at the serious business of royal rumours, gossip and gowns. I'm one ibble dibble calling two dibble ibble with no ibble dibbles, and that's dibble ibbles. I had actually prepared to say that and I practiced it so many times in my head doing it right, and then I just got it wrong. But that's okay because I think that means I passed the test.
You passed my test, Tom. That was wonderful. Flying colours. And I'm Maeve.
And if you don't know what the Ibble Dibble game is, that means that you have not watched enough Crown to listen to this episode. We're going to be talking about episodes 1 to 4 of the new season 4 of The Crown. We haven't seen past episode 4, so you're safe if you haven't either. But we will be spoiling everything in those episodes.
Oh my god, I'm so excited to talk about this. I have just been dying for this show to come back. I think everybody has been waiting for Diana to finally appear, and I'm just so glad that from the 4 episodes we've watched so far, it is sensational. Yeah,
it's really, really good. I do feel like each of these 4 episodes does something kind of different, so I feel like there's loads of different things to talk about. And different approaches. So yeah, I'm similarly very stoked to talk about this.
I remember us talking last season about how they didn't feature a lot of what was going on in Northern Ireland, and it felt like they really glossed over a pretty major part of UK history in that regard.
Yeah.
But they start up episode 1 of season 4. Straight away, we've got the IRA.
Yeah. And we have it like spliced in with the Queen doing kind of military dressage on her horse. I thought it was very interesting the way they set this up, because you had these kind of like people who are very willing and ready to go into real combat to fight versus this kind of ceremonial display of military prowess. And I was kind of intrigued as to what this was saying about the Queen and about the royals and about the English.
Yeah, and I'm really interested to see what Irish people and Northern Irish people are going to say about this episode, because I know last season when we talked about the Aberfan episode, we thought that was a very effective episode, but it came in for a lot of criticism from Welsh people.
Yeah.
And watching this episode, I do think if you are someone who isn't really familiar with what was going on at the time in Ulster, this might kind of go over your head a little bit, because it does sort of feel like a super speedy, reeling in the years montage of the biggest moments. And without context, that might be quite confusing for people. But I was surprised that they bothered to do that at all.
Well, they couldn't really ignore the IRA any longer, because they kill Dickie Mountbatten, who, as played by Charles Dance in the last series, he was such a big part of that, especially emerging as a father figure to Charles. And we see as well in this episode, after his death, Charles and Philip even fighting over, like, he was my daddy figure. No, he was my daddy figure. And it's kind of like weird, like, turbo daddy issues kind of confrontation. Dickie is obviously killed just after he has sent this letter full of fatherly advice to Charles.
Yeah, this seems like a particularly potent piece of creative license.
Yeah.
So we talked in the last season about how Mountbatten and the Queen Mum sort of teamed up and they concocted this plan for Charles and Camilla to ruin their love.
Yeah.
And that was such a fiction. But because of that, then in this first episode, we see him writing this letter to Charles and telling him, this is your duty, your most important task, to marry an innocent girl who's going to play by the rules, and really pushing him. And yeah. I guess that sort of sets in motion everything that we're going to see with Diana in the coming episodes.
Yeah, definitely. I was really intrigued by all the shots of hunting that were kind of interspersed with the shots of the IRA getting ready to blow up Mountbatten's boat. And, like, the royals come out of these first few episodes as totally hunting obsessed and obsessed with blood sports. So I thought this was, like, an interesting metaphor for Peter Morgan to be using.
Yeah, I mean, as we know, he's not a great one for subtlety.
Yeah.
And we'll always go for the obvious metaphor. And we've even seen the stuff about blood sports before in the Helen Mirren film, The Queen. There was all the stuff with the stag in that as well.
Yeah, it made me think that because the royals characterised their love of blood sports as all in the efforts of conservation and maintaining the population across their estate, which will benefit everything that lives and grows on their land. Like, do they apply the same logic to the troubles in Northern Ireland? And I'm just kind of thinking, like, this suddenly puts the royals in the sights.
I was very struck by the way they handled the funeral, because I was expecting it to be a very intimate display of the personal tragedy that all the royals were feeling, but they framed it by having the state funeral that Mountbatten gets with a voiceover from an IRA speech talking about the victims of Bloody Sunday and how they didn't get a state funeral, and that while the British Crown is in Ireland, whatever blood is shed is on their hands. And it seemed like a really unusual thing for this show to do. I felt like a really interesting effort here to give a more nuanced take on what his death meant, not just for the members of the family, but outside of that as well. And I know some people felt like that choice was in very poor taste. So I'm really eager to see what the reaction to this is going to be.
Yeah, definitely. And I thought that their decision to kind of re-politicize the royal family right at the beginning of this series was great, because, you know, you can tell that this season of The Crown is going to be about all these interpersonal, familial dysfunctions, marriages breaking up, children being disappointments, all of that kind of thing. It's all this human side of the royal family that Peter Morgan is so interested in. And I thought it was great to just remind everybody right at the beginning, no, these guys are political as hell. Remember that.
I do wonder how this will play out. You know, as we said, we've only seen these first 4 episodes so far. And I do get the sense, given what we've seen in previous seasons, that Peter Morgan and the team behind the Crown might feel like, okay, we've sorted out the whole Irish issue that one.
Yeah. Without, in fact, ever saying what it is the British did at any point. But in previous seasons, the Crown has been criticised for being too much focused on the men in the royal family. But it seems like they've really revised their approach this season.
Yeah, I mean, the big story with this season, obviously, is the introduction of 2 formidable women, Margaret Thatcher and Diana Spencer, and how their interactions with the Queen really shape her legacy and how they illuminate new sides to the Queen that we haven't seen so far. And let's start by talking about Margaret Thatcher, who is played by Gillian Anderson, and who delivers a fucking wild performance. Holy shit.
Yeah, she's like a lollipop with the voice of a cigarette.
Wow, that was beautiful, Tom.
Thanks.
I could not get over this. I was thinking, because, you know, we talked about in the season 3 how it took a while to get used to, especially Helena Bonham Carter as Princess Margaret, that felt like a totally different person to Vanessa Kirby as Princess Margaret. But
in fact, Helena Bonham Carter.
It felt like a totally different character. The issue, though, with Thatcher is that we know what she looks like and sounds like in a way that we didn't really with Princess Margaret. And Gillian Anderson comes in all fucking guns blazing with this honestly crazy performance to me. I cannot get used to it. It feels so strained. The voice is out of control.
Your Majesty.
What did you think?
Well, I actually came up with a joke about it. The lady's not for turning her performance down a notch. It's definitely all, like you say, all guns blazing all the time. I do think that the voice is quite accurate at times, but it is such a wild voice that it's impossible to believe that it's accurate. That's the problem.
And as well as that she maintains that voice everywhere.
Yeah.
And obviously we've never seen what Thatcher was like in her home or when she was just talking to her kids or whatever. But we do know that she worked very hard to train her voice into this very particular manner of speaking, and that was specifically for her political role, and that's how she would talk in cabinet and all this kind of stuff. And the fact that Gillian Anderson doesn't temper that or modulate that at all when she's just talking to Dennis, her husband, or anything like that, strikes me as a little bit off, I think.
Yeah, I think it was like a little bit of a misstep, possibly. But we did actually get some questions from our listeners about why, well, American listeners, I think, about why people in the UK hate Margaret Thatcher so much.
Tom's going to roll up his sleeves. He's been waiting to deliver this sermon.
I mentioned a couple of episodes ago that I was going to, like, do it just on the end of a normal episode, and then it was, like, too long to include. I will try and just, like, go through it kind of quickly. She's obviously massively divisive and mainly hated. There are people that really love her, but they're predominantly like rich Tories, and
nearly dead.
Yeah, nearly dead. And her policies didn't have the kind of negative effects on them that they did on like the vast majority of the country. So this like love-hate thing is like mainly across those kind of voting lines, although there's like socioeconomic factors as well.
They really, really hated her, though.
Yeah.
Like, people celebrated when she died and dancing in the streets and stuff.
Yeah, like, she had a state funeral, which is, like, another big, like, sore point for a lot of people. But during that state funeral, like, people were just, like you say, dancing on the streets.
Yeah, I think that's something to bear in mind as well, because we can tell that the relationship between Thatcher and the Queen is getting more tense, but she did allow her to have a state funeral. So, clearly it wasn't all bad all the time.
So a quick roundup of what she did during her reign, I was going to say, but her time as Prime Minister. She shut the mines and the steel factories, which like lost thousands of jobs and basically destroyed the UK's manufacturing industry. And at the same time, she deregulated the financial sector, which led in turn to the financial crash. And because she had done both of these things, it meant that the UK's economy was entirely reliant on the financial sector, which is why it affected people so badly when that came crashing down. So she even had an effect decades after she was out of power. She stopped funding free milk in schools, which was a big thing because we've just had all this stuff over here with our current government stopping free school meals for kids. And obviously people get so up in arms when kids are not getting the nutrition that they need. And it's always going to be the poorest in society who are going to be affected most by these. So it's like vastly unfair. She introduced like this poll tax, which was like a flat rate of tax for, you pay the same if you were a millionaire as you would if you were like working in one of the factories that she then closed. People were very angry about that. And I think something important about that was that she trialled it in Scotland and it didn't work. And everyone hated it, but she kept going with it anyway. And I think you see that in this series because her cabinet are against a lot of the things that she says, but she goes ahead with them anyway. So it's kind of like her arrogance that's really a big sticking point with people about her personality.
Yeah.
So this tax, the poll tax, one of the ways you could try to avoid paying it was by not registering to vote, because that gave you an address, and the address was what you were getting taxed on. So then when it came to the election, there were far fewer people who would be more likely to vote her out, registered to vote, because they wanted to avoid paying this tax. So it was like a way of voter suppression as well, it turned out. And it probably contributed to her getting re-elected.
It's just sick.
Yeah, it is. And history just repeats itself across the world.
She also introduced Section 28, which you may have heard of. It was a legislation that said that local authorities shall not intentionally promote homosexuality or publish material with the intention of promoting homosexuality, or promote the teaching in any maintained school of the acceptability of homosexuality as a pretended family relationship. And that was only removed 20 years ago.
Yeah, and that's exactly the thing, is that she caused so much hardship during her time as Prime Minister, but also the things that she put in place took so long to get rid of, or had effects decades after. I mean, she privatised a lot of utilities and things. Like, that's why our train fares are so expensive. And it means when these like private firms go bankrupt, the country still has to bail them out, because we can't function without like electricity, water, like infrastructure like trains. So it's basically privatising the profit from these things, but nationalising the debt. She also got us stuck into the Falklands War.
Which we see in one of these episodes.
And that cost £700 million at the time, which I think is in like the billions if you put it into like real money now.
Sure, yeah.
And obviously there are a lot of deaths and also civilian casualties as well.
And people make a lot of fuss. People like Jerry Halliwell, make a lot of fuss about her being the first female prime minister in the UK, but she did fuck all for women, and we see that in this season. I thought one of the, again, obvious but very striking ways they handled this was I think it's the second episode, when it both starts and ends with pictures of Thatcher and her cabinet of all white men, and her in the centre, in both cases having a portrait taken of the group. And we hear Gillian Anderson's Thatcher in The Crown talking to the Queen when she's saying she doesn't want women in her cabinet. And she says, "I found women in general tend not to be suited to high office. They become too emotional."
Amazing to say that to the Queen.
I know. And then the Queen says very confidently, "I doubt you'll have that trouble with me."
I liked that we get this kind of like subplot with Thatcher where she discovers, to her surprise, that the Queen is so informed and interested and hardworking when it comes to politics. Like, Peter Morgan being like full-on lick-ass right there.
But listen, we got to talk about Diana, because this is the breakout for the season. People keep talking about how Gillian Anderson is going to win all these awards for that incredibly strained, over-the-top performance, but I think Emma Corrin is phenomenal in this. Newcomer, don't think she's been in much else, but she is superb as Diana. I could not get over how good she is. Like, she looks pretty much like her, like she's got a fairly strong resemblance, but her voice is perfect. Yeah,
really good. There was a great line she says when she's like, "I'm rather thick at geography." Which was like Tom. So much like her, almost as good as me. But yeah, from the moment we see her dressed as a mad tree, she plays a blinder. So
as we see, she meets Charles at their home when he is dating her older sister Sarah, and then a few years later, when Charles and Sarah are no longer together, he's asking Sarah about Diana and what's she like, and tell me all about her. And one of the things that he learns is that her nickname is Dutch, as in Duchess, because she always acted as if she was destined for greatness.
I did really feel like the show had this view of Diana that she had set her sights on Charles from a very young age, and that she fully intended on becoming a princess.
We do see her pursuing him to some extent, like that weird scene at the races where he's in his like really cool convertible and she like approaches him and starts telling him how sorry she is about Mountbatten's death and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, she's only 18.
Oh, yeah.
And he's like, what, 30 or 32 or something?
Yeah, definitely. And I kind of feel like she has set herself on a path that she doesn't really know what the end is, and then she kind of can't get off it. But that scene is amazing because she's wearing those yellow dungarees.
Oh, so good. Oh my God, that outfit with that incredible cardigan.
Yeah.
With the floral embroidery and the ruffled trim. I love it. It did strike me as a little bit weird, though, that Diana comes across as like an orphan in this.
Yeah.
And like, you know, we've talked before about Tina Brown's excellent book, The Diana Chronicles, which if you haven't read, you absolutely should because it's amazing. But she really makes clear in that book that a lot of the reason why Diana was so needy and clingy to some extent and felt a real desire to be loved was because of what happened when she was a kid with her parents, and how her parents split up and her mother lost custody and her father was very distant, and that he remarried this very overbearing woman, Rain Spencer, and that they had a very dysfunctional relationship early on. I think they got on better later in life, but that whole thing affected her so much. Yeah. And that, you know, the way that Tina Brown tells the story, that she really saw Charles as her escape and that he would love her, and then when he didn't love her, that the public loved her and that she loved her fame for that reason. And it all kind of comes back to the parents, as it so often does. But they're totally cut out of this in what I felt was so weird, because you see Charles and Diana going to the Royal Albert Hall or something with her grandmother as their chaperone, and it's like she only has her grandmother and her sisters, and
yeah,
that's it.
Well, that's all you need for a flirty opera date with Charles. But it's after that date that she gets the invitation to Balmoral. And that's the whole second episode, is people going to Balmoral and having a shit time.
Oh my God. I think this episode is fantastic.
Yeah, really, really good.
It's such a good way of marking the distinctions between these three women that are really forming the core of the season, because you have Thatcher doing the test and then Diana doing the test, and one failing and one passing. The Balmoral tests are seemingly real, and I feel like we've talked about them before in relation to Meghan Markle and how the tabloids speculated that she would fail the test because she's
anti-hunting.
Yeah.
And honestly, if this is any thing to go by, she probably would, because they're fucking obsessed with hunting.
These tests are miserable.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Straight away when we see Thatcher and her husband Dennis arriving at Balmoral, they're already failing, because the maid is asking her why she didn't bring any outdoor shoes, and she's like, what the fuck is an outdoor shoe? And when she goes stalking with the Queen and she's wearing that blue skirt suit and her little block heels and her perfume, and the Queen is like, well, the deer is gonna fucking see you and smell you and hear you, you gotta go home and change.
I know, and I thought it was so funny because you have the new Prime Minister to come and stay up in Balmoral. At least the idea here is that you're going to try to build a relationship with them. But the Queen has no interest in that at all. All she wants to do is kill this fucking deer. That's all she wants to do. And I thought this episode did, like, the impossible, because you do feel for Margaret Thatcher. Not something I thought I'd ever say.
I know, especially because you have that bit in the room when they first arrive and the maid is saying, you've got the protocol sheet over there that's going to guide you through the weekend, and it tells them you have to be in black tie for dinner at 6 p.m. So they follow it to the letter and they go down at 6 p.m. in their black tie, and everyone's just sitting around in their like soggy hunting clothes.
Yeah.
Like, what the fuck is this? What are you doing here? And she delivers like the lowest curtsy you've ever seen.
Oh my God, it's insane.
God. And the whole thing is excruciating, and it just shows you how totally made up all this stuff is.
Yeah.
That you could be following everything to the letter and still fail because they change their minds as it suits them.
Do you remember that bit where they're like filing out past them and you just hear Philip saying like, they'll probably be in their pajamas for lunch tomorrow? And it's like, what a fucking asshole. Like, these people are hosts and they make absolutely no effort to make their guests feel comfortable. Everything is about trying to get the guests to fit into this impossible environment for the royal family's own amusement.
Yeah, and Thatcher's background is middle class.
Yeah.
So she wouldn't have experienced stuff like this before. I really enjoy the bit where it's just Thatcher and Dennis in the room, and she is so shocked about how they're behaving, and she's like, they aren't sophisticated or cultured or elegant or anything close to an ideal. And he says they're boorish, snobbish and rude. And it's like, yes, they fucking are, yes.
Absolutely.
So true. And obviously this is completely made up. This is total fiction. We don't know if she ever did have to do the Balmoral test in this way, and whether how badly she failed or anything like that, but I can believe it. We have to talk about the game that Tom opened the episode with, though.
Yeah, so this was like a perfect example of how you can fail the Balmoral test even when you like seem to be succeeding. Like, they're all playing this wild parlour game that I don't think I'm posh enough to have ever played before. I'd never heard of it, but this ibble dibble. And they're so pissed off afterwards when Margaret Thatcher gets her turn correct, when she's like very slow and ponderous and trying really hard to get it right.
Number 1, ibble dibble, with no dibble ibbles.
Yeah, you actually feel sorry for her because she is like painstakingly trying to not mess this up.
Yeah, but that's not the point. The point is to entertain the royal family and make everyone feel at ease, and she should have, I guess, fucked up so that they could kind of enjoy themselves more.
One scene that I wasn't crazy about was the scene of Princess Margaret, and so far in these 4 episodes she's had fuck all to do, so I can tell they were like, okay, we've got to give her something. So they have a scene where Thatcher is working in one of the rooms rather than being out hunting, and Margaret is confronting her and gives out to her for sitting in a chair that no one ever uses, despite no one having told Thatcher not to sit there. And when Thatcher refers to the Queen as her sister, she says, "She's the Queen, not my sister."
This kind of tone switching, we know from books like Mam Darling that this is like a real hallmark trait of Princess Margaret, where she would just suddenly go from being like really kind of informal and jovial to being a stickler for these kind of etiquette and protocol rules. And I just thought this is like so disorienting to be around. It's almost like some kind of psychological warfare. It's like torture. You don't know what is right and what is wrong.
Yeah, like even when she's saying, "I beg your pardon," she's correcting her and saying, like, "Say what? Not I beg your pardon. Begging is common." And then later, when Thatcher ends up leaving early, she's dumbfounded and she's like, "I was incredibly friendly. I positively gushed."
These absolute pricks.
They are monsters. This whole episode is so good at showing up how monstrous this family are.
Yeah.
Because then we have Diana arriving just after Thatcher leaves, and she proves that basically you need to have grown up in this environment,
Yeah.
and have been steeped in it all your life to pass this stupid Balmoral test.
Because actually the key to the tests isn't necessarily following certain rules, it's just having this kind of confidence and I guess the intuition that comes with being from that background to kind of be charming to everybody at dinner and to kind of know when it's okay to be a bit shabby, because actually what you're wearing that's shabby is probably like 300 years old, you know, and given to you by Queen Elizabeth I. So Diana aces it. She even helps Philip kill the stag that everyone's mad about.
Yeah, it's in those moments, like the fact that she only brought outdoor shoes.
Yeah.
And she knows how to perform a little bit at the dinner with her conversation to get a laugh out of people and to charm them. And it's those kind of things that have the whole family thinking, okay, she's going to work.
Yeah, it's like knowing just how much you can push in those kind of conversations where, like, you know just how rude of a joke you can tell in the situation. You know just how informal you can be without, like, pushing people past a breaking point. And she just does it masterfully.
But it's fucking toxic. Like, this kind of stuff, if you're good at this kind of stuff, how does that equip you for the kind of public role and, you know, stateswoman-like position that you're meant to have as a member of the royal family? It's total nonsense.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, well, she's good at mucking around in boots and a wax jacket. It's just so mind-blowing.
Yeah. So as well as seeing, like, how the Queen, I guess, is affected by these people, we see what effect this weekend has on both Diana and Margaret Thatcher. So Thatcher totally changes up her cabinet after this weekend, because her first cabinet that she drew up was almost entirely predicted by the Queen. So I'm guessing it was very much in line with the kind of people the Queen thinks should be running the country. And so Thatcher has decided that she doesn't want people of privilege in her cabinet. She wants people with grit.
Yeah. I enjoyed that line. That very pointed line. Although they are, as we said, still all white dudes. Again. Yeah. And then in regards to Diana, I can imagine this experience would be very validating. And, you know, Charles is obviously very pleased with her. Not in the way you would be with a girlfriend, though. Doesn't he? Like, he, like, pats her on the shoulder, like, because he's proud of her.
Oh, yeah. It's like she's a dog at a dog show. And she's just done a great run through those little tunnels and seesaws.
But she is pleased with herself, and when she gets her first hint of paparazzi attention, we see she has a sort of coy little smile on her face.
Yeah.
And then straight away in the next episode, they're getting engaged. I really like this scene where it's sort of going around to every member of the family, finding out that Charles has got engaged, and sort of build up and how it happened. And then it's sort of crashing down when they ask him, like, did you get down on one knee? And he's like, no, I only do that for the Queen or whatever.
Yeah, it's like we went from daddy issues to mummy issues really quickly.
Yeah, and saying that he sent her back to London straight after. And we see her in London again, a little bit excited by the media attention. And then she's like celebrating with her friends, like probably the last time she gets to kind of be a normal 18-year-old, going clubbing and then singing God Save the Queen in their
like all 18-year-olds do, just crashing around the place. Favourite song.
Another great scene when they're choosing her engagement ring.
Yeah, really good. And she chooses a different one initially, one that the Queen already owns, so they wouldn't have to pay any extra money for it. But then she obviously settles on the now iconic sapphire one, which is, Charles points out, the most expensive.
But she just seems so detached from it. Like, she's just sort of picking it up like it's anything. She's not sort of treating it with the kind of reverence you'd expect that perhaps Kate Middleton might have whenever she was offered any of the jewels. And I feel like you get that sense in relation to the whole wedding planning, that it really has very little to do with her.
Yeah.
And this is kind of the only thing she has any say in. Because we see her move into Kensington Palace then, and having to do all the training to get equipped for being a princess. And it's suggested at one point that the Queen might help with this kind of teaching. And she says, oh no, there's far too much to learn, far too much to get right. And you know I'm too much of a softie.
The Queen as a softie is such a ridiculous idea to me. But it's clearly something that I think Peter Morgan is quite attached to, this idea.
But then after that, you see this fucking demented scene of them all standing around in a circle in the palace, and Diana arrives and has to do this deranged ritual of bowing and curtsying and addressing each of them in the correct order and with the correct honorific, and they're all correcting her in this very blunt manner, and Charles isn't helping her out at all. He seems so cruel.
It honestly seems satanic. This like weird kind of pentagram of royals. Speaking of Charles being cruel, we get that kind of iconic moment when they're being interviewed about their engagement, and Charles says, whatever in love means.
Oh, that was so good. We haven't said it already, but I'm loving Josh O'Connor in this season, as we loved him last season. We are super fans of his, and I felt like he's done such a good job of bridging the gap between that very sympathetic Charles of the last season that we felt so sorry for, to growing into the kind of Charles that we are now acquainted with.
Yeah.
And how he doesn't seem to know what to do with Diana, and we don't see them kiss, we don't see them hug or have any real kind of tenderness between them. Straight after they get engaged, he goes off on tour for 6 weeks and doesn't call her for like 3 weeks or something. And she is totally alone, and you really feel her isolation. I really liked seeing her apartment filling up with flowers, that people are constantly sending her flowers, and you can feel like the weight of that and everything, that it's becoming this like suffocating, claustrophobic space that she's totally tormented by all of the expectations people have about her when she's getting the fan mail and she's watching the coverage of herself and reading the coverage of herself.
And then she's doing these tutorials with Lady Fermoy, who is literally tying her arms to her side so that she can't show her emotion when she speaks. Like, as if the kind of the implied suffocation of the flowers and the attention, everything wasn't enough. We have this physical restriction.
Yeah. But then in between those moments, we see her like listening to George Michael or roller skating around the palace, listening to Duran Duran on her Walkman. And then as well as that, we see the eating disorder. Yes.
In a very heartbreaking and graphic scene, she just seemed so alone in that kind of that series of shots, which was really sad.
And trying to get through to Charles, trying to get through to the Queen, just trying to talk to anybody, and you really feel how isolated she is.
But Charles did give her some really good advice before he went away on his tour. He said that if she's ever feeling lonely, she should get in touch with Camilla, because Camilla's just the best company.
And they meet at this concept restaurant.
I laughed so much at this. The concept of this restaurant is only starters and desserts.
And apparently Camilla loves this. I'm surprised by this. Although her son is a food critic. So, you know, maybe they are into...
I just really see her as a main course person.
She eats Diana for lunch. Isn't that right, Tom?
That is true. And actually, it just occurred to me that maybe Camilla could be seen as the starter and dessert of Charles's marital life.
Oh, very nice.
But yeah, it's obviously a horrible scene to watch because you do have so much sympathy for Diana, but it was also amazing and my favourite thing from these 4 episodes.
This scene is exquisite. The best moment so far for me.
Yeah.
We see this very charged conversation between the two of them where Camilla is very patronising, constantly talking down to her and showing off how much she knows about Charles and the royals and how close they are and how it just comes effortlessly to her.
Yeah.
Unlike Diana. And we learn all this crazy stuff about Charles, like how he always has a soft-boiled egg with everything and that he doesn't eat garlic, he never eats lunch.
Yeah, he apparently drones on and on about gas and bloating and needless digestion.
Which you can totally believe.
Yeah. I really like that she hates all of his gurus, that he like has all these mentor figures to help him with
Lawrence
his...
Vanderpost and stuff.
With his like intellectual and spiritual life, and I 100% can believe that Camilla has no time for that.
Yeah, me too.
But I think what really sums it up is when Camilla says, "Darling, you really know nothing, do you?"
And she says it in this kind of playful way. And that happens again then at the end of when they're kind of fighting over who's going to split the bill. And Diana says, "Let's go Dutch." And then here we have another heavy-handed but great moment when Camilla says, "I'm all for sharing."
So good. Like, such a great villain of the piece, Camilla.
I'm so glad that she's getting some stuff to do because she really vanished last season.
Yeah.
And we missed her so.
And they're really...
Emerald Fennell is great as well.
Oh yeah, so good. And they're really giving her, like, a lot of quite playful stuff to do. Because I felt like, you know, they could make her quite a sort of po-faced kind of villain. Or, like, even an off-screen villain just... through kind of what Diana experiences with Charles, but I'm glad that she's on screen and that she's so entertaining.
Even when she's not on screen, though, she's still a looming presence. We see Diana learning that Camilla and Charles have these like really stupid nicknames for each other. Fred and Gladys, which are, I have since learned, the names of 2 characters from The Goon Show, a surrealist British radio comedy show from the 1950s that Charles reportedly loved, which is just ridiculous. And anyway, Diana sees these nicknames sketched out on a design for a bracelet that Charles has had commissioned, which is so awkward and apparently really happened.
Ugh, it's so grim, especially because you then learn that Charles has lied about when he's coming back from his royal tour. He actually gets back earlier, and it gives him time to go straight up to Highgrove to see Camilla, quite possibly to give her this bracelet that he's had made. And then he doesn't see Diana until they're actually at the wedding rehearsal.
Yeah, I felt so sorry for Diana in that scene. I mean, you feel so sorry for her all the time, but when he kind of feeds her this line about how, "Oh, I was just going to tell her it's over, and to show my commitment to you, I've brought you my Prince of Wales signet ring," and she, like, laps it up.
Yeah, I know. The whole, like, situation of having to confront your fiancé about his other affairs at the altar where you're going to get married like the next day, it's just wild.
And maybe it was just for budget concerns, but obviously we don't see the actual wedding. We just have this very foreboding image of her leaving the palace in her gown on her own, and it's a very chilling moment.
Yeah.
Especially because it's been preceded by all of this sort of doom and gloom, these very fraught close-ups of everybody looking very suspicious, and the conversation that we see between the family members about how Charles is still in love with Camilla, and you have Margaret saying, "How many times can this family make the same mistake?" Philip, like, weirdly confident that it's all going to work out, and as Diana gets older, she's going to get more and more beautiful, and Charles is going to fall more and more in love with her. this like totally unfounded belief that it's going to be fine. Shows how little he actually knows his son.
With the Princess Margaret thing, I guess it goes back to what we were saying about how, like, Helena Bonham Carter's portrayal of Princess Margaret is so separate in my mind from Vanessa Kirby's portrayal. Because, like, when she started talking about how many times we're going to make this mistake, I was like, oh yeah, she's the one who wasn't allowed to marry Townsend. And, like, it took me a while to, like, connect the dots and be like, oh yeah, that makes sense for her to say that.
I thought it was, like, a little bit overdone, but I did really like this scene with Charles and the Queen speaking the night before the wedding and looking out the windows of the palace and seeing the fireworks, and he's crying. You do really feel for him. You know, you can imagine that Charles does in some way feel trapped and like totally obligated to do this, even though if Mummy had just said it's okay, you don't have to, he would have called it off
a mile,
in an instant.
And, like, because you had that bit where he was talking, I think, to Camilla after she aces the Balmoral Test, and he says something along the lines of, like, but is she the right one? She's, like, so young. Implying, how is everyone so sure that this girl is, like, the perfect person to become a princess and to be my wife and things? And, like, that you do feel this family pressure and this, like, weird situation that they've all found themselves in.
Yeah. And I think, you know, obviously we were so excited to see what was going to happen with Diana. We were very intrigued about how they were going to do Thatcher. But I've been dying to see what was going to happen with Prince Andrew.
Yes.
So we have to talk about this 4th episode, which gives us our first glimpse of the young man that will grow into the Prince Andrew that we have talked about so much in the last few years.
Yeah, so this episode is all about the kids. There's a big storyline with Thatcher and her son who goes missing on a race across the desert, and somehow that brings us into the Falklands War. Like, not super interested in talking about that, although it is weird that Thatcher uses her politician voice to talk to her kids in her kitchen. But the real focus is that the Queen doesn't know who her favourite child is, which is something that she suddenly thinks is really important to know.
I did think this was like a very goofy and quite contrived plot, but I loved this episode.
Yeah.
Like, all the same, it was so good. So we see her talking to Thatcher, and Thatcher saying that her son is her favourite, and the Queen is shocked that someone could have a favourite child. And she talks about it with Philip, and he's like, of course you have a favourite, everyone knows who your favourite is. As she's like, I haven't got a clue, who could it be? So she decides to get her aide to arrange one-on-one appointments with each child so she can figure it out. It's so silly.
Even saying it out loud, I'm like, oh yeah, this is really stupid.
But I did really enjoy when she's talking to her secretary or whatever, and she's saying, please prepare a short briefing document ahead of each meeting, focusing on each child's hobbies, interests, and so forth. One would hate to appear uninformed or cold. And that was just spot on, I thought.
Yeah, really good. We start with Edward, who is played by Angus Imrie.
The son of Celia Imrie, if you know who she is.
And I was absolutely blown away. This was like coming in all guns blazing. This child is fucking awful. He's the worst.
You think he's the worst.
Well, yeah.
But yeah, he's so spoiled. He's so bratty. He's straight away complaining about everything. He's like jeering at the menu. He's like, oh, is it poached salmon? It's always poached salmon. Ha ha. So awful.
And where's my money, mummy?
Yeah, he's like asking for more civil list money and then talking about his college applications. So smug. Like, people will always want me.
Yeah. I really, really want to know if Prince Edward has seen this.
How could you resist?
I know.
But it is funny that when he came in, we were like, wait, is this Edward or Andrew? It could be either of them because they're both such belligerent personalities.
With such high opinions of themselves, yeah.
Allegedly.
Yes. But then we got Anne, who we knew Erin Doherty would be playing Anne from last season. And I have to say, throughout these 4 episodes, she's just been consistently so good.
Yeah, she's brilliant. And I really liked the scene where the Queen visits her at her home with her first husband, and they go out horse riding and then have this like really grim, like soggy picnic on the grass where it's raining. And, you know, Anne, who... everybody loved Anne in the last season, and that she was this like really bright personality, but now we see her, she's like very bitter, she's miserable, really unhappy in her marriage, she hates the press, she calls them like bastards, and she's also very jealous of Diana. And she's saying like Diana gets all the praise, all the compliments, all she has to do is put on a dress and her pictures on the front page of a newspaper, while I'm doing the real work with real charities and nobody cares. And wouldn't it be nice to get a pat on the back sometimes? That really stood out to me, because all we hear about Anne now is that, you know, she's happy to work quietly, she's a workhorse, she doesn't need anyone's recognition or acclaim, but you can see that it would get to her.
Especially as the Queen greets her horse with more affection than she greets Anne when she arrives, and she's saying like, "Oh, hello, will we go on a walk?" to the horse.
Yeah,
and then,
people are going to love that, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we learn that Anne, well, as we know, was cheating on her husband, and the Queen is going to send away her lover, and Anne is begging her not to, but the Queen says, like, be patient. And I liked Anne's reply when she says, "Is that your solution to everything? Do nothing."
Yeah. Oof. That's strong words.
I know, even though we often talk about how we believe that the Queen is more interfering than we're led to believe, it did stand in contrast to Thatcher, because the scene before, when she's talking about the Falklands War, and she's saying, you know, how will anything change if we do nothing?
Yeah.
There's another difference there between them.
I thought Anne was so like Philip, especially Tobias Menzies' Philip, in the way she was talking here. Like, just the way she speaks, she makes it so clear that she takes after Philip, not her mother. And I think the way they were arguing, even in this scene over certain things, reminded me of the Queen fighting with Philip.
Yeah, and Philip is so open in that scene that Anne is his favourite. Answers straight away. I did think it was very funny when he's teasing her. He's teasing the Queen about, like, oh, have you worked it out yet? Because everyone else knows.
Yeah.
Because, like, Tobias Menzies doesn't have a lot to do in these first 4 episodes, but I love him as Prince Philip. I feel like I'm one of the only people that liked that episode with the astronauts in the last season. Everyone hated it so much. But listen, we've got to talk about the favourite.
Oh, yeah.
Andrew, played by Tom Byrne, who is fabulous as Andrew.
Yeah, very
I thought
good.
He was wonderful. I thought he looked very like him, especially in profile when they're having dinner or when they're having lunch at the table. I thought he was a very good likeness. But I just was crazy about his entrance.
Oh, in the helicopter.
Oh my God, when he lands on the lawn outside, and you know he's fucked up the grass, and we know the Queen hates when people land on the helicopter outside her house. And then he just like carelessly throws his helmet to one of her staff. It's a very good performance.
Yeah, really, really good. We get like a glimpse of the man that Andrew's going to become, perhaps. So he starts talking about Koo Stark, who is an American actress that he fancies. He's telling the Queen all about her new film, The Marquis de Sade's Justine, about a nubile 17-year-old girl.
So gross. And the Queen, like us, is like, I don't want to know anymore. And he's like, don't be such a prude, mummy.
Yeah. I liked when she said, "The young, racy American actress. I'm not sure which of these words make my heart sink most."
Yeah, did you have big waggly eyebrows going, oh?
My eyebrows were very waggly at that point, you're right.
I think this is probably the closest that we're going to get to any suggestion of Andrew's alleged sexual misconduct.
Yeah.
Because we have heard, and we talked before on the podcast about how Peter Morgan has said that he's not interested in covering any of Andrew's friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, which came as a real blow to us.
Yeah,
I understand that it would be legally difficult and that there are all sorts of complications around it, but if this is all the Andrew that we get in this season, I still think it was a very good scene.
Yeah. And
he's also shown asking her about what his title's going to be when he gets married, and when she says the Duke of York, he's like not happy about it at all.
Yeah. like the grand old.
He does compliment the poached salmon,
Yeah.
unlike rude Edward, so he butters her up that way.
Yeah, and I couldn't quite tell whether he has like a natural affinity with her, like they both actually really like poached salmon, or if he is quite calculating.
He knows how to play
and
her.
knows how to play mummy. I thought, did you think that maybe Edward was more interested in money and he was more interested in titles and, like, I would say notoriety? He's certainly got plenty of that now, but, that kind of
Status.
prestige and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, as we know, Andrew's terrible with money, and
Yeah.
obsessed with everyone in his family having titles.
Yeah.
As well as that, we see them talking about him going to the Falklands War, and we have this bit where she says, "We never shirk action in this family. We're no different to anyone else," which was another
Yeah.
eyebrow
absolutely
raiser.
No different at all.
And I loved when he talked about his chopper, and then he left on his chopper again.
Do you think that Andrew's, like, comment about his, being determined to serve in the Falklands War was kind of like a placatory thing? That, like, they hint at Andrew being interested in the 17-year-old actress, but then they also mention that he's, like, a dedicated soldier and wants to be a war hero.
I mean, I do think because of our age, we only know Andrew as the disgraced Prince Andrew. Whereas, he was really hot when he was younger. People loved him for his military career and for being a war hero. So, there was that stage of his life before it all fell apart.
You can't really leave it out.
Yeah.
Okay. But then we get to Charles.
I know, and I thought it couldn't get any better. And then this fucking scene with Charles is incredible.
So good.
He's living at Highgrove now with Diana, and she's pregnant. And we get this really sad moment where she's just watching TV alone in her room, and he's like banging on the door and screaming at her to come down when the Queen comes over, because she's not just your mother-in-law, but your queen.
And this is the first time we see him being directly cruel, I thought, towards Diana.
Well, their first fight, yeah.
Yeah, like, obviously it's horrible that he was, like, shagging Camilla for the whole time while they were engaged, but this is, like, the first angry words we really get from him towards her, and I thought Josh O'Connor did such a good job, because I really hated him in that moment.
I know, and then we see him going down to meet Mummy, and she is immediately surprised by how many staff he has working there. And we've talked before about how, while the Queen is, or likes to think of herself as, very frugal, Charles is very excessive. But the way he explains this to her, he's speaking like the Charles that we know now.
Yeah.
When he's saying that he's starting from scratch, the tabula rasa. Oh my God, I loved that moment.
So funny. I mean, the Queen's like, I know what tabula rasa is.
Oh my God. And then when he's talking about the gardens, because we know the gardens at Highgrove are Charles's, like, pride and joy.
Yeah.
And when he's explaining them to the Queen and talking about the wild unconventionality of the garden and saying, like, who'd obey the rules?
Yeah, and then she's pointing out, like, there's a lot of straight lines on your tennis court.
Yeah, immediately undercutting him, like, that doesn't look terribly organic. It's so funny.
I thought it was really good because there is, like, this kind of tension when you come to think about Charles, where, like, obviously he has done some really shitty things, and he's a man who's born with incredible privilege, but also he was one of the first people talking about the importance of sustainability and organic farming and all these things, that he was ahead of the curve on certain things. But I thought they just encapsulated it really well in this scene, because yes, he was very interested in all these progressive things, but they were all as, like, an extension of his soul.
Yeah.
He was at the center of everything, and it was like, right, yes, this is it. He's an incredibly selfish person who really only ever thinks about what is best for him and how to show everybody how good he is.
Yeah, and when the Queen recognises that, and in this scene, she describes him and his army of sycophants turning his dream house and garden into the embodiment of his soul, when really what he needs to do is pay more attention to the well-being of the mother of his future child and cut things off with Camilla, because he says one of the reasons that he chose to live in Gloucestershire is that it's close to Anne, and the Queen says not just Anne. Just 15 minutes drive, I heard, obviously alluding to Camilla.
Yeah, really amazing.
Oh, I also was completely obsessed with him talking about Xanadu and then her saying, oh, your wisteria is coming on.
Such a great line. It's like something out of like Alan Bennett or something. I just loved it.
That was such a good moment for Olivia Colman.
Yeah.
This whole episode, she had so much to do. It was brilliant.
And I felt like in this episode, she was much less constrained by trying to be the Queen, because I don't necessarily think I felt like she reacted like the Queen to a lot of these things. She was this character of like person who's not quite sure what's going on with her kids kind of thing, and I think she just played into all of that. It gave her so much to work with, and she was brilliant.
Yeah, I thought it was funny when she has to get pissed then with Margaret and her mum after meeting all the kids, and the Queen mum is like, oh, you don't blame yourself. You're already the mother to the nation. But we did get like a sort of semi-serious scene then after that where she's talking to Philip and she's finally, you know, realised who her favourite is. But she says to him, our children are lost in their own deserts. And he's like, Anne's not unhappy. Anne's perfectly fine. And she's like, no, Anne is lost in her marriage. And I guess the kind of ominous line is when she talks about Andrew and she says, I'm shocked if he doesn't change. What does that say about us as parents?
Yeah, I think, like you said, this episode is probably the closest we're going to get to anything alluding to the Epstein stuff.
It is extremely safe, but it's better than nothing.
Yeah. And I kind of almost would like this to be our only glimpse of Andrew throughout the whole of The Crown, just so that we have this like encapsulation of it. But I'm sure he'll be doing some stuff with Fergie down the line.
You want the toe sucking.
Don't say it like that.
You were saying you'd be furious if there was no toe sucking.
I do think it would be very cowardly. I was just thinking it would be funny if they completely sidelined Diana and just made it all about Fergie and Andrew. But they won't do that.
They did have a little bit of a sentimental bit there then when they were talking about how Philip didn't want to have any more children, but the Queen did to prove that she could be a good mother after kind of messing it up with Charles, and that she promised herself this time around she was going to do bath time and not let the nannies do everything. But she says, when it came to it, I sat in the background because I didn't know how.
It was very moving. I don't really know what to think sometimes when you get these kind of sides of the Queen, because I do feel like there's a lot of license being taken.
I think it kind of shed some light on the position that all of these royals are in and being tied between this amorphous idea of duty and family. And, you know, we have that bit where Thatcher says, like, above all, I'm a mother or something like that.
Yeah.
And, you know, the Queen would never say that. And you're kind of tied because on one hand you're like, it's terrible that you feel like such a sense of public service that you can't be fully present for your family or your loved ones or yourself even. But at the same time, you don't have to do this.
Yeah.
You're not actually given this right by God or whatever it is that people believe.
And like even the way Gillian Anderson's Thatcher is like so surprised at her involvement in picking the cabinet. Not that she has any say, the Queen, in picking the cabinet, but that she does this like prediction. Like the game of politics is really just a game for her because she doesn't have to do anything. So I guess is that kind of hinting that maybe her level of involvement in duty is kind of up to her to a degree.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we'll have a lot more to talk about in the remaining episodes. I did think it was interesting at the end of this episode when you see Charles standing downstairs looking up at Diana's room and possibly thinking of going up to Diana and then changing his mind and walking away. I think we're really going to get into all of that conflict and the collapse of their relationship in the coming episodes, which I am very excited to see. So we really hope you come back and join us next week and let us know what you think of this episode. Do you like Gillian Anderson's performance?
Yeah.
Are you enjoying the Diana storyline? Do you think they're getting that right?
I think we can probably all agree that it's a much more exciting and enjoyable way of viewing the royals than looking at what they're actually doing right now. So I'm very grateful for that.
Thank you so much for listening, and we hope you have a great week. Bye.
Bye.
I really think I could be happier. It's brought something out in me. My own little Shangri-La, Xanadu. And there were gardens bright with sinuous rills. I blossomed many an incense-bearing tree. And here were forests, ancient as the hills, enfolding sunny spots of greenery.
Are your wisteria's coming on? It's flowering already.